E major 251. So what is that? That's what you're going to learn today, along with some easy tips on how to improvise over the 251, and all of that is coming up next. So stick around. Alright, so what does 251 mean? What is 251? Well, it's simply a chord progression, and a very popular chord progression, more prevalent in jazz. You'll find it in all kinds of jazz standards. So if you have your fake book, if you haven't got one yet, definitely get one. Jump over to I Want to Play Bass, go to Bassist Gear Corner, there's a link down below, and pick up your real book today. So it's definitely a must-have for any bassist. It's got over 450 jazz standards in here, and you'll see tons of 251s through there. As you study them, you'll notice and recognize this 251 chord progression that is so prevalent in jazz. But you find it in a lot of pop tunes nowadays, and you just find it in a lot of music today, not just jazz, but all over music. So it's a real popular one, as the 145. And the 251, it stands for your 251. So you have, and we're in E major, so you have E major, and you've got each degree of that scale has a number, right? So it's a reference, the number is a reference point. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then the octave. Okay, there's not 8, that's just the octave. So 251, that's a chord progression, and it means the second, the 5, and the 1. Okay, now that is the 251, that's the chord progression, and the 2, it's a minor chord, because this is the second degree is a minor. Mode is, if you haven't seen the modes, the series I've done on modes, check that out. I'll leave a card up here. You can check those videos out as well. But there's, the E major has 7 modes in that scale. Okay, so there's scales within the major scale. So all of the tones of these chords, the tones in this 2 chord, help push us. It feels like we want to go to the 5 chord, and then the tones in that 5 chord wants to bring us home. So that's why it works so well, and that's why it's so popular. But the 2 is just, it's a Roman numeral 2. It's the 2 chord, 5 chord, and the 1 chord. Now standard, this can be a major. You can do major, you can do anything. As in blues, you see the 1-4-5, you see dominant 1s, dominant 4s, dominant 5s all over. So you can do major, major, major if you want. But standard, typically staying within the key of E or in any major key, that 2 is going to be a minor chord, that 5 is going to be a dominant chord, and that 1 is going to be the tonic, a major chord. Okay? So that's all that means. So you can play a minor arpeggio. So the 2, you can play a minor arpeggio. So it can just be a minor chord. You can be a minor 7th chord. It can be, the 5 can be a dominant chord, a dominant, which is going to be a major chord, but once you call it a dominant, you're adding the 7th. You're adding that 7th note, making it a 4-part chord. So, and then the root is a major as well, and if you want to call it a major 7, you're making it a 4-part chord, and it is now becomes, that has that major 7th in that chord progression, which what we're going to cover today, because that's typically where you're going to see it a lot more in jazz. When you're playing out in your, when you're playing your jazz ensemble, typically you're going to walking bass lines, which we're going to cover today, is what you'll be playing. And so that 2 chord is going to be a minor 7th chord, that 5 chord is going to be a dominant 7th chord, and that 1 is going to be a major 7th chord. Okay, so hopefully that's clear as mud. So if you have any questions, just leave a comment down below. I'll be glad to answer it. Now the reason this 2-5-1 chord progression works so well and is so popular and so common is because, as I mentioned, the chord tones of these chords. So we're in the key of E. Now the 2 is a F sharp minor 7 chord. And you have an F sharp, you have an A, you've got a C sharp, and you've got E in there, okay? And then what make us go to that dominant 7 chord, which moves so nicely to the dominant 7 chords, is it shares the same tone. The dominant 7 shares a tone of the minor 7th, and the minor 7th has a tone that leads us to another tone of the dominant 7. So those two tones is going to be the 3rd, the A is there. They share the A in those 2 chords, okay? So that's what helps it work together right there. And also in the minor 7th chord, you have, in the F sharp minor 7th chord, you have that E, which leads us, which is a half step from the 3rd of the B dominant 7, okay? So that's kind of, it leads us to that, a little resolve there, from there to put us in that B7, okay? And the same goes for the B7 to the E major 7. The 3rd of the B dominant 7 is the same tone as the 7th of E, of the E major 7. And the 7th of the B dominant 7 chord is A, which is a half step from the G sharp, the 3rd of the E major 7. So it kind of has a resolve there, kind of pulls you to that direction, or it can moves to that direction nicely. So that's why the 2-5-1 works so well together, because of the tones of those notes and how they lead us around to move through that chord progression nicely. So see how they work good together? F sharp minor 7, B dominant 7, and E major. See how it just kind of pulls you back to that area and just works with it. That's how it works. So as promised, I've got a couple tips here how to improvise easily over the 2-5-1 chord progression, as you're going to find yourself in jazz ensembles, walking bass lines, and just a way to maneuver your lines through there, your notes, just make your lines work. So tip number 1 is basically just target those chord tones. Know the notes of those chords. So this, we're just talking about the E major today, but this works in every single major key. Every single major key, every single 2-5-1, you can be in C, and the same principles hold true. So that's one way to do it. That's the easiest way, not the easiest way, but that's one way to do it, is just target those chord tones. So like on the F sharp minor 7, target those chord tones. F sharp, A, C sharp, and D sharp, okay? Target those notes, and that'll help you get around. And this will even bring you to a nice transition from that minor 7 to that dominant, that B, or the dominant 7 is going from that 3rd to the 7 to that B, to that root note there. And then just target those notes of the B dominant. B, D sharp, F sharp, and A. Okay, so just target those. And then that'll bring you to the one, the E major, and just target those notes: E, G sharp, B, and D sharp. So that's the easiest way to know the notes of it, study the notes. Even when you're not practicing, just sit down and learn notes of these arpeggios, learn these chords and their arpeggios, and that's one way to do walking bass lines. See how they just work right into one another. When improvising, you don't want to repeat the same line over and over. You want to improvise, you want to go out there. So just use maybe an octave, or use the sevenths, use the thirds in different areas, but just target those notes. Okay, so that's one way to get through it. Next is use passing tones. You don't have to target every note in there. Don't be afraid to use a note out of the scale. You're not tied to the E major scale. You're not tied to the major scale. You can use passing tones, notes that are not in that scale, and sometimes add a whole lot of color to your bass line. Chromatically, it really adds some color. So don't be afraid to use notes outside of that scale, okay? So do not be afraid to use a note out of that tone. Use a half step, just move it. Just get to where you got to go, and you'll be surprised how much color that can add to your bass line. So, don't stick to just that E major scale or just that major scale. You don't have to. Just use some passing tones in there, and that's a great way to make it happen and add some spice to that line. Now, tip number three, another easy way to work through the 2-5-1 is use tetrachords. If you don't know what a tetrachord is, it's just a 4-note scale fragment. Classical term was a 4-note scale fragment, and that's just take the E major scale, 2, 3, 4. That's the lower tetrachord: E, F sharp, G sharp, and A. 4-note scale fragment. That's your first. That's the lower tetrachord of your E major scale. And then the upper tetrachord is going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, and it's just in a perfect fourth. So you start here on E, and you're ending on the fourth, the interval here, and you're starting on the B, 1, 2, 3, 4, and there's a fourth. So it's in fourth interval. So the lower tetrachord, use the lower and upper tetrachords. So you can simply start on your 2, and if you'll notice, the 2-5-1 is all in fourths. Your 2. And the fourth above that is your 5, and the fourth above the 5 is your E, your root, okay? So it's all in fourths. So you just go 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2. Just remember though, this is minor. So it's a minor third, not a major third. So just stay within that scale and you'll be fine. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. You just have to play that root twice, and that's not a big deal. So what works nice is you use all of those ideas in one line. So you're not repeating that over and over. So I'll use all 3 of those ideas in this line here, okay? So what works good is to use all of those 3 ideas in one particular setting. You don't stick to just the upper tetrachords and lower tetrachords. You can stick to just targeting the chord tones, and you can stick with just the passing tones, but use all 3 of these. Alright, so there you have it. A simple walking bass line over the 251, a very common chord progression that you need to know about and you need to practice it as well. So like I say, get your real book and go through there and just find it. Just notice these chords that you're playing and notice the 251s in there, you know, because they're all over the place. That's the 251, that's E major 251. Hope y'all got some value out of that. If you did, help me help you. Mash that like button, and I'll catch y'all on the flip flop in the next video. So bye for now.